The city of Waset shimmered under the noon sun, its limestone walls glowing like bone against the endless blue sky. Perfumed winds drifted from the gardens of Amun's temple, but not even the sweetest myrrh could mask the scent of fear radiating from the palace. Neferet stood in front of the great mirror, her bridal linens too tight around her chest, the golden collar choking instead of adorning her. She was 17, the favored daughter of a nobleman, betrothed to a general older than her father, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. Outside, flutes played and drums pounded like heartbeats, but inside the chamber, Neferet's own heart had turned to stone. She had begged her father to reconsider, pleaded with the priests who blessed the union, even whispered prayers to Hathor, goddess of love. But the answer had been silence. Her marriage would seal an alliance. Her body was currency. Her soul was collateral. As the procession began to line the temple steps, she slipped away, not like a shadow, but like a flame desperate for air. She ran barefoot, past stupefied guards and startled guests, her veil snagging on sandstone pillars. Her feet bled as she reached the outskirts of the city, where the mud-brick homes gave way to reed-covered banks of the Nile. That's where she met him. A stranger in worn linen, crouched over a papyrus boat, repairing a net. His skin was the color of wet earth, his hands calloused, his face marked by the sun and sorrow. He looked up, startled, as the runaway bride stumbled toward him, trembling and defiant. "They'll come for me," she said breathlessly. He didn't ask who they were. He only nodded and held out a water gourd. She drank, and in that moment, something shifted, not in the world, but in her. A noblewoman was supposed to be soft-spoken and still, but Neferet had just chosen motion over obedience, freedom over fear. She collapsed beside him, not from weakness, but from a sudden release of every lie she had ever been told about duty. His name was Menmaatre, a fisherman's son turned healer, exiled once for refusing to let a merchant's child die for a priest's mistake. He did not believe in fate, but something in her eyes made him wonder if the gods had sent her. The temple bells tolled behind them. A falcon cried overhead. Downriver, a boat searched for her with banners snapping like threats. But by then, Neferet was no longer a bride. She was a storm gathering strength on the edge of the reeds, and Menmaatre, who had seen many wounds, knew that the deepest ones are not on the skin. As dusk painted the sky with the colors of rebellion, he stood and offered his hand. "I can't promise safety," he said. "Only freedom." She took it, because the world she ran from was carved in stone, but the one she ran toward had yet to be written. Neferet followed Menmaatre through the marshes, her wedding silk stained with mud and sweat, the golden anklet still clinking faintly like a ghost of her old life. Each step into the reeds was a step away from the cage she had fled, but the shadows of pursuit clung to her like the Nile mist. Menmaatre said little as they walked, but his silence was not empty. It was sturdy, like the reed staff he carried, always one step ahead, parting the tall grass for her path. As the sun dipped low, they reached a fisherman's shelter, half buried in cattails, roofed with palm fronds, and smelling faintly of old salt and healing herbs. Inside were a few clay jars, a broken mat, and something more precious than gold. Stillness. For the first time, Neferet sat without trembling. She unpinned her bridal crown, the cobra crest falling into her lap with a dull clink. She stared at it, an emblem of power, fear, and the life she had just shattered. "They'll hunt me like a jackal," she murmured. Menmaatre glanced at her with calm eyes. "Let them. Jackals run fast." He handed her a roll of bandages and a pot of salve, motioning toward her blistered feet. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. No servant, no priest. Just her wounds, and a man who healed not because of duty, but because it was right. As night fell, frogs croaked in the marsh, and fireflies blinked like distant stars. She lay curled in a blanket, listening to the wind whisper through the papyrus, telling stories older than the pyramids. But dreams did not come easy. In the palace, her disappearance would have been discovered by now. The high priest would blame omens. Her father would scream of disgrace, and the General Jehutamos, he would not accept insult lightly. Neferet knew him, knew the way he watched her as though she were a jewel to be locked away. He had killed men for less than humiliation. Menmaatre sat at the edge of the shelter, sharpening a knife that was more tool than weapon. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. He paused. "Because I know what it means to be trapped, and because sometimes the gods test us, not with fire, but with choice." The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows. "What choice did you make?" she whispered. He looked into the darkness. "I chose to save a dying girl instead of obeying a priest. It cost me my name." Neferet exhaled slowly. "And I chose to run instead of obeying a father. It cost me my life." Silence again, but now it was shared. In that fragile stillness, beneath the stars and gods who watched without interfering, two outcasts lay beneath the same roof, one running from power, the other from punishment. And as the frogs sang and the wind moved like memory through the reeds, the path before them was no longer paved with duty, but something more dangerous: hope. At dawn, the sky turned copper, and the Nile whispered promises through the reeds. Neferet woke to the soft ripple of water and the scent of crushed mint. Menmaatre was already outside, waist-deep in the river, checking the net for fish. His movements were fluid, silent, as if he belonged to the rhythm of the current. For a moment she forgot who she had been: a bride, a daughter, a bargaining chip, and remembered only the girl who used to race beside the canal walls, barefoot and free. But the illusion shattered with the sound of hoofbeats in the distance. Menmaatre looked up, lips tightening. "They've started searching this far south," he said. Neferet stiffened. She pulled the veil tighter around her hair and helped gather what few supplies they had. "Where can we go?" "There's a shrine in the cliffs near Gebtu," he said. "Old, forgotten. No one watches the forgotten." They traveled quickly, cutting through narrow paths along the Nile, avoiding villages, sharing figs and flatbread by moonlight. On the third day, smoke curled above the river's bend, dark, heavy, deliberate. Not from a hearth, from a signal. Neferet crouched beside a fallen acacia tree, eyes wide. Menmaatre studied the smoke for a long moment. "They're burning markers," he said, "telling patrols which areas are cleared. Then we're the next, unless we make them think we drowned." That night they left a trail, broken reeds, a shredded bridle sash caught on a branch, and at the river's edge, Neferet's anklet half buried in wet silt. Then they crossed the Nile on Menmaatre's skiff under the cover of darkness, the river slapping against the boat like a heartbeat. Midway through, Neferet looked back. Wasset's lights were distant now, flickering behind a veil of trees and smoke. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The city?" "No," he said. "I miss the person I was before they tried to own me." She understood. Every mile between her and that temple wasn't just distance. It was erasure. Of expectations. Of chains. Of the version of herself who would have bowed beneath the weight of a man's desire just to be called obedient. On the other side of the river, the land changed. The soil was rougher. The trees denser. At night, hyenas cried like haunted children. But in those wild sounds, Neferet heard freedom. For the first time in her life, she did not belong to a house, a title, or a man. She belonged only to the road, and to the man who walked it beside her without asking for ownership. As they reached the foothills leading to the shrine, Neferet touched the place where her bridal necklace once lay and felt nothing. No loss, no regret. Only a strange, electric certainty that she had not just escaped something. She had become someone. Someone dangerous to the world that wanted her small. And as the night swallowed their path, the stars above looked less like gods and more like witnesses. The cliffs of Gebtu rose like the bones of ancient gods, jagged and silent under the sweeping stars. It took all night to climb the crumbling path, their hands scraping against limestone, their breaths ragged in the thin air. Neferet's wedding robes, once heavy with gold thread, now hung in tatters, catching on thorn bushes and jagged rocks. When they finally reached the shrine, the first blush of dawn lit the horizon in pale red. The shrine was a ruin, its pillars cracked, its hieroglyphs faded, its offerings long since plundered by jackals and desperate men. Yet there was a sacredness here, raw and unclaimed, like a heartbeat under bruised skin. Menmaatre led her inside. The inner chamber smelled of dust and old prayers. A broken statue of a goddess, maybe Isis, maybe Hathor, stood at the far end, her face chipped away by time or malice. It didn't matter which. The goddess was still watching. Neferet dropped to her knees before the altar, not to pray for salvation, but to mourn. Not for the life she had left behind, but for the girl she had once been, the one who believed duty was love and obedience was strength. Menmaatre knelt beside her, setting down a clay jar of water and some dried dates. "This place," he said softly, "was once where the Forsaken came, women abandoned by husbands, soldiers disgraced in battle, children cast out by priests. They carved their new names into the walls, so the gods would know them anew." Neferet ran her fingers along the stone, feeling the grooves of forgotten names, each one a defiance against erasure. She stood, a fierce light rising in her chest. "Then I will carve mine." She found a sharp shard of limestone and etched into the wall, stroke by stroke. Not the name her father gave her, not the title the priests used. A new name, one only she would define. It took time. Her fingers bled. Menmaatre said nothing, only watched with the quiet respect of a man who understood rebirth. When she finished, she stood back and read it aloud. Nefra, beautiful one, not because of lineage or alliances, but because she chose to survive. Menmaatre smiled. "Nefra," he said, tasting the name like a blessing. They rested there, hidden by the cliffs, as patrols scoured the riverbanks below. By night they lit small fires and spoke in low voices. Menmaatre told her of his village by the western marshes, of a mother who taught him to heal with herbs and prayer. Neferet, or Nefra now, told him stories she had never dared speak, of secret dreams to travel beyond Wasit, to see the lands of Nubia and beyond, where no one knew her face or her price. In that crumbling shrine, they built a world of maybe and might be, fragile but alive. Outside, the desert winds howled, carrying warnings to those who listened. But inside, two runaways slept under the broken gaze of an ancient goddess, carving a future from the ruins of their past. They heard the rider before they saw him, the sharp rhythm of hooves against stone, the jingle of bronze, the unmistakable cadence of pursuit. Menmaatre pressed Nefra back against the shrine wall, fingers against her lips, eyes alert. A plume of dust rose from the path below. Then he emerged, a black horse foaming at the mouth, and on its back, a man in dark armor, wearing a jackal mask carved from obsidian and gold. Not a soldier, a seeker, trained by temple priests, paid by noblemen, unbound by law. They hunted not just bodies, but secrets. "He's not just looking for a runaway bride," Menmaatre murmured. "He's looking for a threat." Nefra's throat tightened. She had heard of the seekers, how they never spoke, how they cut out the tongues of those they captured, as if silence could erase rebellion. The seeker halted at the foot of the cliffs. He dismounted with precision, scanning the path, touching the ground like a hound sniffing blood. Then he looked up. Nefra couldn't see his eyes behind the jackal mask, but she felt them, felt the weight of being prey. Menmaatre gestured toward the shrine's hidden exit, an old crawl space that led to the ravine. They had scouted it days earlier, unsure they'd need it. Now, it was their only chance. They moved quickly, silently, but stones betrayed them. One slipped beneath Nefra's foot and clattered down the slope. The seeker turned. He didn't charge. He waited. That was worse. It meant he knew. As they slipped into the narrow passage, the first arrow struck the stone just inches from Menmaatre's shoulder. They ran, scraped, bruised, breathless, until the ravine widened into a dry riverbed. There, Menmaatre turned. "Keep running," he said. "No," Neferet hissed. "You'll die. If he takes you, your death won't be quick." Neferet's hands shook, but this time she didn't obey. She grabbed a fallen branch, set it ablaze from their pouch's last ember, and turned to face the path. "Then we fight." The seeker came swiftly, blade in hand, eyes never blinking. Menmaatre lunged, clashing metal against metal. Neferet circled behind, thrusting the burning branch toward his side. The jackal-masked turned, just slightly, long enough for Menmaatre to strike. His blade found the gap beneath the arm, where flesh was real and mortal. The seeker staggered. Neferet slammed the torch into his chest, flames catching on his linen binding. He screamed, not with pain, but rage, and stumbled into the dust. When he didn't rise, they stood over him, chests heaving. His mask lay cracked on the stones. Beneath it was a face no older than Menmaatre's, eyes wide with the same fear they had felt for days. "They send boys to hunt women," Neferet whispered, "because they fear the women who run." Menmaatre dropped his blade, and even more the ones who fight. They buried the body beneath the stones and fled into the hills, not as fugitives, but as survivors with nothing left to lose. The desert wind howled in approval, and far above, a falcon circled once, then vanished into the sky. The days that followed were brutal. Sun-scorched trails, scarce water, and feet that bled through torn sandals. But neither Neferet nor Menmaatre spoke of turning back. With each step southward, the world of palaces and priests faded behind them like a half-remembered nightmare. Before them stretched the road to Nubia, a land whispered about in temples, foreign, untamed, free. The Nile curved in wide, lazy bends now, flanked by dense reeds and red cliffs. At night they camped in hollowed caves where old gods once watched sacrifices. By day they moved with caution, trusting the river to guide them. But always above, the falcon returned. It circled high, often in silence, its wings catching the desert wind, never too close, but never far. "It's Horus," Neferet joked one evening, smiling as she sat beside the fire, her back against a rock. "Watching us because the gods don't know what to do with us." Menmaatre glanced upward. Or maybe it's a soul that recognizes one of its own. A soul? The dead don't rest easy in cities that silence the living. Neferet stared into the flames. The fire cast flickering gold onto her scarred feet and hands, each mark a badge of what she'd escaped. She no longer flinched at the sound of distant riders. Her breath no longer caught at shadows. She had been trained to kneel and smile, to accept fate and call it honor. But now she knew better. They reached the edge of Nubian territory by the seventh night. A lone trader's post sat by the river, a shack with faded tapestries, baskets of salt, and a one-eyed man who spoke 3 languages and trusted no one. "You're far from Wasit," he said, eyeing Neferet's gold-threaded hem and Menmaatre's reed-stained fingers. "We're looking for work," Menmaatre answered, "and a place where names don't matter." The trader studied them for a long time. Then he pointed east. "There's a village 2 days from here. They need healers, and they don't ask questions if your hands are clean and your heart is steady." That night, Neferet washed the last remnants of wedding coal from her eyes in the Nile. The black streaks curled like ink into the current, vanishing downstream. She stared at her reflection, cheekbones harder now, eyes clearer. No longer the bride, not yet a queen, but something in between, something becoming. Menmaatre sat beside her, arms crossed over his knees. "Do you think they'll ever stop looking?" She didn't answer right away. "I hope they don't," she finally said. "Let them waste their years searching temples and tombs. Let them fear the empty space I left behind." The falcon passed overhead again, its cry sharp, wild. Neferet watched it disappear into the sky. "Let them know I'm not gone," she whispered. "I'm just no longer theirs." Menmaatre didn't speak, but he reached for her hand, and in that quiet touch, in the heartbeat between exiles and rebirth, they began to write a new story, one not carved in stone, but carried in the wind. They arrived at the Nubian village beneath a veil of dust and sunlight, their clothes worn to thread, their skin browned and calloused by the journey. The village was nestled between hills striped with gold ore and shadow, built from sun-baked mud and topped with palm thatch. Children chased goats through narrow lanes, and women stirred clay pots over open fires that smelled of lentils and thyme. But behind the laughter and rhythm of daily life, Neferet sensed something else, grief, like smoke clinging to old stone. Menmaatre felt it too. "They've buried someone," he murmured, eyes on the woven black ribbons tied to doorposts. They soon learned it was a healer, a woman named Senita, beloved and wise, who died a week ago during a sandstorm. Her loss left the village exposed, not just to illness, but to fear. In places where gods feel distant, healers become faith made flesh. Menmaatre offered his hands without pride. He treated a child with fever using lemon balm, wrapped an elder's torn ankle in soaked linen, and brewed remedies that tasted bitter but worked miracles. Neferet watched him blend herbs with care, his fingers steady, his eyes gentle. Each wound he touched seemed to believe in its own healing, but the village was wary of her. Too clean, too upright, too silent. A stranger who looked like she once belonged to a world that enslaved others. It was the children who softened first. One little girl named Kia ran to her with a bruised arm and eyes full of trust. Neferet bandaged it carefully, whispering a tale about a goddess who turned pain into stardust. The next day, 3 more children came. By the end of the week, she was painting healing symbols on walls and telling stories by firelight. Stories not of nobles or priests, but of runaways who dared to become something else. But peace was fragile. One night, a trader brought news from the north. The seeker's body had been found, buried under loose rock. The high priest of Wasit had called it an act of divine vengeance, and declared a sacred hunt for the woman who'd shamed the gods. "They call me a curse now," Neferet said, her voice low as she stood at the edge of the river. Menmaatre stood beside her. "You're not a curse." "No, I'm a story they can't control." The villagers held council the next morning. Some were afraid. Others, especially the young, argued that anyone who dared defy the temples deserved sanctuary. In the end, it was the elders who chose. "You came not with weapons, but with healing," one said, "and our fields have begun to sprout again. That is no curse." Neferet bowed her head, not in submission, but in respect. She had not asked to lead, but perhaps leadership wasn't about bloodlines or blessings. It was about standing firm when others trembled. That evening, she stood at the center of the village square, wrapped not in silk but in humble linen, firelight dancing across her cheeks. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a bride or a fugitive, but as herself. He arrived just after the first harvest, tall, lean, wrapped in white linen that shimmered with sacred oil, his head shaved, his eyes like obsidian wells. He called himself Herihor, a wandering priest of Thoth, and he came bearing blessings, scrolls, and charm beads strung on papyrus thread. The villagers welcomed him with cautious warmth. His voice was soft, his words eloquent. He spoke of balance, of the stars' alignment, of forgiveness and new beginnings. But Neferet felt the tremor behind his smile. When she met his gaze, it lingered just a breath too long, and then it slipped. Recognition. He knew. That night, Menmaatre found her standing by the village's northern gate, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "It's him," she said. "Not a priest, a messenger." Menmaatre's face darkened. "You're sure?" "He was at my wedding ceremony. I remember his chant. Then he's not here to bless us. He's here to take you back." But Herihor didn't confront them directly. He played the long game. He charmed the elders with proverbs and cured a man's persistent cough with powdered resin. He praised the land and thanked the ancestors. And slowly, he asked questions. About a healer. About a woman with amber eyes and a firebrand's voice. The village held its breath. Neferet didn't hide. Instead, she stepped into the sun. She approached him in the open courtyard as the village watched. "You came for me," she said. Herihor didn't deny it. You were consecrated to the house of Amun. Your vow was public. Your escape was a sin against the gods. No, she said. It was a sin against men who pretend to speak for them. You have drawn blood, he hissed. A seeker is dead. So is the part of me that would have let him chain me. Herihor moved closer, lowering his voice. You think these people will protect you forever? Temples do not forget. Neferet didn't blink. Then I'll become something they can't remember how to name. Herihor looked at her one last time, as if memorizing her face for some future reckoning. Then he left. No threat, no blessing. Just a silence that settled like dust in every doorway. After he was gone, Menmaatre asked, Why didn't he try to take you by force? Because he wanted to see if fear still worked, she replied. And it doesn't. That night the villagers gathered around her, not in awe, but in unity. Kia held her hand. An elder kissed her brow. A hunter offered her a carved pendant, shaped like a phoenix. You burned the old, he said. So now rise. Neferet stood before them, a girl once destined to disappear inside gold walls, now standing in the open, a storm clothed in linen. She was no longer a bride, no longer a fugitive. She was a reckoning. And as the drums of the harvest echoed into the stars, the people began to chant, not a hymn to gods who stayed silent, but a new song for the girl who dared rewrite her fate. 3 weeks after the priest's departure, a courier arrived at dusk, dust-covered, wide-eyed, and trembling. He carried a scroll sealed with the crest of the high priest of Waset and a message spoken in hushed tones, Come willingly to Thebes, or see this village turn to ash. Neferet read the scroll beneath the light of a flickering oil lamp, her fingers steady even as her heart pounded like war drums. The ultimatum was clear. Return to face judgment or bring ruin upon those who sheltered her. She had always known it would come to this. Her defiance had not just humiliated a general. It had embarrassed the entire temple hierarchy, and they could not allow her story to inspire others. That night she climbed the hill above the village and sat beside Menmaatre, who watched the stars in silence. They want me to walk into their fire, she said. He didn't respond immediately. Then he turned to her, his voice low. Then let them burn trying to contain you. If I stay, they'll destroy what we've built. And if you go, they'll destroy you. Not if I rewrite the trial. At dawn, the village gathered in the square. Neferet stood before them, no longer a girl in silk, but a woman in linen dyed with crushed berries, her hair braided like a warrior's. They want a public display, she said. Let's give them one, but not in silence. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the villagers lit a great pyre in the square, not for sacrifice, but for declaration. A ring of flame, a circle of truth, the trial of the flame. Neferet stepped into it willingly, arms lifted, eyes open. A voice rang out. Hers. They say I am a curse, that I fled sacred vows, that I shed blood to escape a bond I never chose. She turned slowly, facing the crowd. But I say the curse is silence, the sin is obedience without love, and the blood I spilled was in defense of a life no longer owned. The villagers watched, spellbound. Some wept, others clenched fists in solidarity. Let them come, she cried, her voice rising with the flames. Let them drag me to Waset. Let the priests chant and the generals rage. I will not bow. I will not beg. I will speak. And I will not be alone. From the crowd, Menmaatre stepped forward, then Kia, then the elders. One by one, they joined her in the ring of flame, unarmed but unafraid. If they take her, said the old hunter, they take us all. A boy lit a second fire, then another, until the entire square glowed with defiance. Somewhere in the shadows, spies watched, messengers ran. But the image had been seen. The trial of the flame was not a ritual of submission. It was a birth cry. The next day, Neferet began writing her words onto papyrus, not as pleas, as scripture, not to preserve what was, but to ignite what could be. The temple wanted a prisoner. What they had awakened was a revolution. The temple guards arrived a fortnight later, 30 strong, armored in bronze and fear. They marched into the village expecting surrender, an easy capture of a girl foolish enough to challenge the gods. But the village greeted them not with silence, but with song. Children beat drums carved from goat skin. Women lined the square, their heads held high. Men stood in the fields with tools in hand, not as weapons, but as symbols of the life they had chosen to defend. And in the center stood Neferet, robed in red linen, a serpent carved into her armlet, her eyes bright with something the guards had never seen in a bride: power. "You will come with us," the captain said. "The gods demand justice." "Then let them come claim it themselves," she replied. He stepped forward, drawing his blade. "Defy the will of the high priest, and you condemn these people." Neferet raised her voice so the whole square could hear. "You don't fear me because I ran. You fear me because I lived. You fear every girl who will hear my story and decide she doesn't belong in your chains." A hush fell over the crowd. Then a single elder stepped forward. "We have no chains here," he said. "Only roots." Another voice rang out. "And wings." The captain hesitated. His orders had not prepared him for resistance without violence, for a woman who stood like a queen among commoners, whose story had already burned through the valley like wildfire. The priests had sent soldiers for a fugitive. Instead, they found a myth in the making, one spark away from legend. He turned. "Retreat," he muttered. "We return to Wasit." But as they left, one of the younger guards, barely a man, paused and looked back. "You were never just a bride, were you?" "No," Neferet said softly. "I was a girl told to obey. Now I'm the voice that tells others they don't have to." The soldiers disappeared into the horizon, and with them, the last echo of the life she had once been shackled to. That night, the villagers celebrated not with wine or gold, but with stories. Around the fire, they passed down the tale of the girl who chose herself, of the healer who stood by her side, of the trial lit not to punish, but to proclaim. Neferet took her place at the edge of the gathering, staring up at the stars. Menmaatre joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You were never meant to be forgotten." "No," she said, smiling faintly. "I was meant to be remembered like fire, bright, dangerous, and impossible to control." In the distance, temple bells rang for morning prayers. But in this village, prayers were now whispered in her name, not as a goddess, but as proof that the sacred can be born from defiance. Neferet, the bride who ran. Neferet, the woman who stood. Neferet, the fire that could not be drowned. And so her story spread, like the wind across the Nile, unstoppable, eternal.